right, welcome everyone to the second episode of Venue Visionaries. I'm Gil Freed.
And
Matt,
I'm Matthew Castell.
great to see everyone. We're now in a snow country in the middle of winter, but our hearts and thoughts are out there in California, where they have suffered some horrible fires and they're causing unimaginable harm to people and property. But they also can wreak havoc on sporting events. Due to the fire, several events have been moved or postponed. This includes the NBA's Los Angeles Lakers and the NHL Los Angeles Kings, who have been forced to unfortunately postpone games, but rightfully so when everything else is going on around them. Also, the NFL's Los Angeles Rams relocated a game altogether, moving their wild card playoff game against the Minnesota Vikings to Glendale, Arizona, which is the next closest large stadium where an NFL game could be run. Also, the Genesis Invitational PGA Tour will also be moved. Then there are hundreds of high school and college events that also have been postponed. The question is whether this is an appropriate response and what can be done. So we take a look at a natural disaster and its potential impact, and then we have to see, all right, sports is entertainment, but should we look at it from a different perspective? So what are your thoughts, Matt, on this proposal? And then I think a part of that is, well, if you're Glendale, Arizona, or another area, how do you prepare for this? Because normally when you have a major event, you have weeks to prepare. Here you might have a couple days.
Right. It's quite a feat on both ends. First, it's sort of the argument to postponing these events is pretty, to my mind, pretty simple. You have certain issues that you need that you're not going to have that you'd normally have. Number one is employees. These are humans as well. Their houses, their communities are in jeopardy. You may not, even if you wanted to go ahead with these events, you may not have the employees to staff it because they're being evacuated. They're not going to show up to work because they're protecting their house, their family. That's number one. Number two is the community resources. To run let's say the NFL playoff game that moved, there was going to be all sorts of fire, police, uh, you name it, first aid that would have to be at the game to facilitate it properly. Well, they're scrambled right now. They have higher priorities than a football game. They're trying to save lives in the community. They have their hands full, so they're not going to be able to help you. So that's another reason not to have the game and to move it. And then another one simply is public relations. Do you really want to be hosting an event and the community looking at you saying, hey, I've lost my house. Why are we going on with this event? This isn't proper. And then another thing that to think about is by keeping the event on your calendar, it causes a lot of stress and concern among people. Is this really going to happen? Are you going to postpone it? Are you going to delay it? So sometimes the earlier you can make your decision, the better for these sorts of things. And it's not easy on the other. It's not easy moving it either, which I'll think you'll take some of that, Gil, but or why they should have played. But just think of what happened in Phoenix, where they have to flip it on its other side and on a dime, all of a sudden host a major NFL playoff game with little to no warning. And there's so many considerations they had to think of. How's our schedule? It's very hard to have a large venue to be totally dark. So I'm sure they had to cancel out some smaller things. And then number two, the same problem with employees. How do you get employees to show up on a dime with literally no notice? It's quite a feat all the way around. Gil, what are your thoughts? Could they have played these games in Los Angeles? Would have done any good? What do you think?
So let me get first to a different topic, though, because you're arranging it in my mind from a different perspective as well. And so I appreciate that. The logistics side, just think about it. What if you have put your field into hibernation? You don't want to use it. And now all of a sudden you have to revamp, you have to start the watering system again, all those kind of little details. Think about it from the perspective of you have pro shops at a stadium. You're going to have two teams that are not the Arizona Cardinals there. How do you stock it with merchandise? Because that's one of your big per cap sales during an event like this. How about bringing back all the foods? You might have emptied out all your freezers and cleaned up all your kitchens. Now you have to get it ready again. Think about the cost associated with that. So that just jumped into my mind as an additional concern that people don't often think about it when it has to be moved. Now, since I'm in Florida, it is not really the cold side of thing, but except it's snowing right now. But so it's like, why not play the games? It's something that's going on. You just deal with it, kind of thing. Uh, but is it the ability to unite a community that makes sports so unique? It brings up spirit. You start the economy again. Teams can have fundraisers, can invite first responders and victims. Maybe they can house displaced people in some venues. Remember 9/11? And post 9/11, George Bush going out to a New York Mets game, and how that just 10 days later, here's untold tragedy and untold deaths, and it's showing resilience of a community. Does that have more value than saying, hey, we're going to move the game just so it's more convenient for employees, fans, and players and stuff like that? I think that's a serious issue that has to be taken into consideration. And this has been done in the past, and we've seen it in prior events because we've had major disasters. We've had an earthquake during a World Series in San Francisco. You've had flooded fields. You've had tornadoes that have impacted venues and stages for both concerts and sporting events. So we've had experience with this, and we have always overcome. So we will overcome this as well. The question becomes, can we take this as an opportunity to unite and galvanize? And so that's one side that I would like to try to throw out there. I know you have a different side, Matt. So what's your side?
Well, I sort of touched on a lot of those points, but I think another thing that probably doesn't make the papers and probably people don't think about, probably what was going on behind the surface at SoFi was that they were being put under pressure by local stakeholders about the possibility of sheltering in place. Um, there are, I don't know, thousands of people right now without a home. And if you've read anything about the situation that housing is ridiculously expensive in Los Angeles on the best day, and now that there's uh, unbelievable demand with less supply, it's just heartbreaking what people are going for to just find a place. So I'm sure at some level there's been discussions with the city of Los Angeles about can we use SoFi or any of the other venues in LA as shelter in place. But the hard part for SoFi is, they're a very busy venue, and I'm sure they have events at their events, which would cause them to cancel. Like how, at what point do you go back after a tragedy like that? That's one thing that I would think about is that doesn't really get discussed is the whole shelter in place. And you brought up a lot of good points about I certainly remember 9/11, how that turned out when the Mets finally played their first home game, and how it sort of galvanized the community when Mike Piazza hit a home run and the Mets won, etc. But even that was several days after 9/11. It just doesn't happen so quickly as we want. And then you know, I will give all my credit to the people in Phoenix and the city of Phoenix as well, because it's not just, again, the stadium. They had to procure hotel rooms, a large number of hotel rooms for the fans and whatnot. And I think even the owner of the the Arizona Cardinals even rented buses to get fans to Phoenix who would travel into LA. So that's some of the things that I think about. There's just with a disaster like that, it just becomes very hard to operate your venue on a normal basis. Gil, what else am I missing?
So it makes it hard to operate your venue, but you're looking at it from the side of the empathy associated with everything else that's going on, and it's just a game. So I know that that's the flip side of what I had raised. But if we start taking a look at these kind of issues, you have that for basically every single sport venue. where you're going to have at one point or another some kind of issue, and you need to be uh, in a place where you can contact others. And that's one of the nice things about groups like the Stadium Managers Association, where a lot of the people know one another and we come to each other's aid. And that's something that people often don't think about, is that while we might be rival venues, when we have to circle the wagons, as they say, and to help one another, we do that as an industry. And that has been told many times in the past, and there's many examples of that. And we've seen it with other past disasters. One that I'm intimately familiar with, it happened a little bit before my time working in this space, was the collapse of the roof at the Hartford Civic Center back in the late 70s, 1978, if I'm not mistaken. And what was done there and how they had to find new places for people to play while they rebuilt the entire facility. That took years. And what are you going to do with the shows that are under contract with you? How are you going to respond to that? So that becomes one side of thing. But this is where that attention to detail really comes into play. And so one venue that I've have experience with was the old New Haven Coliseum, which was famous in a Doors song, Blood on the Streets of the Town of New Haven. It was a major issue there where he got arrested there, the lead singer, during a concert there. But before it was closed, a couple of years beforehand, there was an issue where there was a tornado and there was a bicycle event that was traveling from New York to Boston, and they were in the New Haven area. And so the mayor had asked the venue, can you house the people here? Well, were they ready? They weren't ready to house all these people there for a number of days to respond to what was going on and to protect themselves. And the one thing that really came out was you can never have enough toilet paper. Because we had only a limited stock of toilet paper, that became the biggest issue, is how we're going to take care of people. Yes, you have the food issue. Yes, you have the water issues. Yes, you have heating and all those kind of things. But the toilet paper was the one that got people really, really upset. And we've had similar incidences like that with like New Orleans with the Superdome when they had Katrina and they had to house people there who had no place to go. How do you respond to that? And so this goes back to our previous episode one video and podcast where we're looking at being nimble and having a plan. You have to have a plan for these kind of situations as well.
Yeah, for sure, Gil. You have to have that plan in place. Um, and one other thing I'd like to point out, or a couple of things I'd like to point out, is sometimes when you're a sports facility venue manager, you don't have a choice. Sometimes the municipality or the governing bodies like Major League Baseball or the NFL will tell you you cannot open up your facility. And that happens. But yes, you have to have a
Or
plan.
that you have to open up your
Or you
venue.
have to, and to go through New Orleans, I was involved to some extent weeks after it happened, what happened at the convention center in New Orleans. They weren't, after Katrina, they weren't expecting anyone to show up, but they just showed up. And on a dime, they had to become, whether you call it shelter in place or temporary housing. And toilet paper wasn't a problem for them, but they wiped out their food supply in days because you're not anticipating having people there 24/7 for several days. So yeah, you have to sit through what is your emergency plan if this happens, this happens, this happens, and try to come up with many contingencies as you can.
Excuse me, Matt. So if we were looking at some teaching tips, sports can heal, but there's also a proper time and place for everything that we do because we are, in fact, sports or entertainment. What do you have as a teaching tip besides always have a plan and be ready for the unexpected?
Well, that's basically it. That's what you should be doing, is always having a plan. I think on top of that is, again, we mentioned it earlier, is just work closely with your partners. Ask them for their advice. They're gonna have expertise you're not gonna have, and you have to be prepared to be flexible. That's one thing when you enter this business, you may think you know what you're doing in the morning, but you don't at night. So what's that expression? You have a plan until somebody punches you in the face. That's kind of what it's like sometimes, is you can have the best plan in the world, but you got to be flexible and roll with it. And I think just having basic good management skills of making sure you have work well with your employees, so you know how to communicate with them, you know how to contact them in an emergency. I think that all that's important stuff.
Great. That brings us to our final question. If you knew the local community was suffering from a tragedy and ran a venue, what would you do with an event scheduled the next day? Why don't you guys ponder that, and we'll be back with some answers in just a second. All right, welcome back, everyone. In terms of the answer to the question, if you knew the local community was suffering from a tragedy and ran a venue, what would you do with an event scheduled the next day? In terms of an answer, I think it depends upon the severity of the tragedy, because there's tragedies that happen every single day, unfortunately, all over the world. So it's something that we have to be aware of, and this thing that Matt mentioned previously in this video is being aware of your surroundings and the news and everything else, so you understand what's going on and monitor that. But you want to connect with local stakeholders in advance to identify possible solutions and strategies just in case. So it's always going to be just in case. What if there's a major accident on a freeway and people can't get to your venue? Do you have a plan in place to possibly use alternate routes or to use an alternate facility? That's the kind of stuff where you have to plan for the weirdest things possible, because when you don't have a plan, that's when things are going to happen. Thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, and I think you have to think two steps ahead. We started off by talking about the LA fires. When they first broke out, I'm sure the people at SoFi didn't anticipate the playoff game getting moved right away, but you sort of have to think worst case scenario. What if this happens? What if that happens? And you sort of plan for the worst case, and then hopefully the worst case doesn't come up and you're able to do the event. And the other thing I think you have to think of when you have this event, you have to speak to whose event it is as well. You may be just hosting the facility, the facility may be just hosting it, but is it a team from out of town and a local team? Are they going to be able to get into town? Are the airports still open? You have to think through all those things. And like I said, thinking 2 steps, 3 steps ahead is very important, and coming up with contingency after contingency.
Having enough toilet paper in stock if you need it. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for your time. And this is Gil.
And this is Matt.
And I hope you enjoyed the second episode of Venue Visionaries. And we look forward to seeing you on our third show. Take care, guys. Bye.